The sound of my dinner hitting the trash can still lives in my head like it happened 5 minutes ago. I had spent almost 4 hours making that meal. Roast chicken with lemon and herbs, garlic mashed potatoes, green beans with toasted almonds, and a strawberry pie cooling on the counter because my husband, Mark, had been saying all week that he wanted something homemade for once. He said it in that lazy way of his, like he was doing me a favor by suggesting I prove my worth. So I made it all from scratch. I even ironed the tablecloth. Then Mark walked into the kitchen, looked at the table I had set, and did not even say hello. He opened the lid of one of the dishes, sniffed it once, made a face, and said, "What is this, school cafeteria food?" I laughed at first because I honestly thought he was joking. He wasn't. Before I could answer, he grabbed the tray of chicken, marched over to the trash bin, and dumped the whole thing in there. The smell of lemon, herbs, and butter rose up with the steam, and I just stood there with my hands frozen at my sides. "What are you doing?" I whispered. He wiped his hands on a paper towel and shrugged. "My mom and sister are coming over. I'm not serving them this. They deserve something better than your weird little comfort food experiment." Then, like that was not enough, he pointed at the pie and said, "And this? Don't put this out either. It looks cheap." Cheap. I remember staring at him and feeling something inside me go very still. Not loud, not dramatic, just silent, like a door closing somewhere deep in me. I looked at the dinner I had made with my own hands, now buried under coffee grounds and yesterday's takeout, and I realized something. That was the last meal I ever cooked for my husband. Not the last meal he ate, the last meal I ever cooked for him, because standing there in that kitchen, while the man I had built my life around tossed my effort in the trash like it meant nothing, I finally saw our marriage for what it was. Not love, not partnership, not even a bid. It was service. It was obedience. It was me shrinking myself so he could feel big. And that night, I stopped shrinking. I was 32 years old, and I had been married to Mark for 6 years. We met the old-fashioned way, through a coworker's barbecue in our little town outside Columbus, Ohio. He was funny back then, or at least he knew how to make people laugh. He had that easy smile that made strangers trust him. He worked in home renovation, owned a truck that was always dusty, and liked to talk about the future like he already had it in his pocket. He said he wanted a simple life, which sounded romantic to me at the time. A house with a porch, a dog, Sunday dinners, a wife who understood when life got stressful. I thought I was that wife. I came from a quieter kind of family. My mother had raised me mostly alone after my father left when I was 12. We didn't have much money, but we had routines. My grandma Eleanor lived 2 streets over and had the kind of house that smelled like cinnamon and old books. She taught me how to cook, how to budget, how to fold a fitted sheet properly, and, most importantly, how to notice when someone wanted my kindness more than they wanted me. I did not understand her last lesson until much later. When Grandma Eleanor died 2 years into my marriage, I was devastated. She had been the one person who never made me feel like too much or not enough. She left me her old house, a tiny 2-bedroom place with a blue porch swing, and a small rental property she had owned for years. Mark acted supportive when the will was read, but I noticed the way his eyes changed when the lawyer mentioned the rental income. Not because he cared about my grandmother, because he cared about what she had left me. At first, I told myself I was being unfair. Mark was under pressure from work, his business was unstable, and everybody gets a little sharp when money is tight. So I made excuses. I paid the mortgage on Grandma's house with the rental income. I covered groceries when he was slow on a job. I cooked, cleaned, remembered birthdays, bought gifts for his mother, and kept his life running like a quiet machine nobody thanked. His mother, Diane, had a gift for making her disappointment sound polite. She would come over once a month with Mark's sister, Tessa, and sit in my kitchen while I poured tea and listened to them discuss everything I was doing wrong without ever saying my name too loudly. Diane thought I was too soft. Tessa thought I was too plain. Mark thought I should be grateful he had given me a marriage. The first time he threw one of my dinners away, it was because his boss had canceled a job and he was in a bad mood. The second time, he said I used too much garlic. The third time, he told me, "Real wives learn to read the room before they try to be impressive." I should have left then. But people like me do not leave at the first insult. We explain. We adapt. We keep the peace until the peace becomes a prison, and we are too tired to remember there was ever a world outside it. So I stayed. I stayed until the night he threw my chicken into the bin and looked at me like I was the problem. His phone buzzed right after that. He glanced at the screen, and his whole face changed into something almost cheerful. "Good," he said. "They're on the way. Go freshen yourself up. And don't wear that faded blue dress. My mom hates that color on you." I think that was the moment I understood the truth with complete clarity. I was not his wife in the way I thought. I was an accessory that had stopped being useful. I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I didn't even speak. I walked past him, took my purse from the counter, and pulled out the envelope I had been carrying around for 3 days. It had been sitting in my glove compartment before that, unopened, because I had not found the right time to deal with it. It came from the law office that handled Grandma Eleanor's estate. A follow-up notice, they said. Something I needed to sign regarding the trust. I had planned to read it after dinner. Now, with my meal in the trash and my husband already preparing to host his mother like I was a maid in my own kitchen, I tore it open at the table. The first page was routine, property details, trust language, dates. The second page made my hands start shaking. My grandmother had added a clause I had never seen before. She had protected the house and rental property from being considered marital assets in the event of any pattern of financial exploitation, coercion, or documented disrespectful conduct by a spouse. I read that line 3 times. Then I looked up. Mark was still on his phone, smiling at something. He had no idea that my grandmother, sharp as a needle until her final day, had seen exactly what kind of man he was. The clause continued. If my spouse ever attempted to pressure me into giving up, selling, or signing over the inherited property, the trust would immediately shift into legal review under a family protection provision my grandmother had apparently created with her attorney years earlier. I did not even know that was possible. The final line was the one that stayed with me. This trust is for my granddaughter's security, not her captivity. My throat tightened so hard it hurt. I reread the words until I could hear my grandmother's voice in them. Security, not captivity. That night, while Mark's mother and sister arrived with expensive wine and fake smiles, I sat through dinner with my hands folded in my lap and listened to them insult my cooking as though I had not made any. I had put out store-bought rolls because there was no dinner left, and Diane had the nerve to say, "This is what happens when women don't know their place in a household." Mark laughed. I think that laugh hurt more than the chicken in the trash. Tessa said, "Honestly, if I were married, I'd make sure my husband always came home to something special." Diane added, "A man works hard all day. The least a wife can do is make him feel respected." I looked at Mark then, really looked at him, and saw the little smirk he tried to hide. He liked watching me take it. He liked his mother and sister putting me down because it kept the room balanced in his favor. For the first time in our marriage, I didn't rush to smooth things over. I stood up, collected my plate, and carried it to the sink. Diane frowned. "Lena, are you all right?" "I'm fine," I said. The lie tasted clean and cold in my mouth. Mark barely looked up. "She's probably upset because I told her the chicken was dry." Dry. That was the word he used for my 4 hours of effort. I turned off the kitchen light, left the sink full, and went upstairs before anybody could ask me to fetch anything else. I slept in the guest room that night. Mark came in around midnight and tried to be charming, which meant he was nervous. He sat on the edge of the bed and said, "You know my mom can be a little intense. Don't take it personally." I stared at the ceiling. Then he said, "Tomorrow, I want us to talk about the house." There it was. The real reason for the visit. I turned my head slowly. "What about it?" He smiled in that practiced way. "We need to make things easier for the future. My business is growing, and the market's unpredictable. It would just make sense to put the house and the rental in both our names." I almost laughed. He wanted my grandmother's house in both our names. Not because he had ever fixed the broken porch step or replaced a roof tile or paid a single bill on time for that property. Because he wanted access. Because he wanted leverage. I asked him, "Why?" "Because we're married," he said, like that was the end of the conversation. "And because it would show commitment. My mom says that a husband should feel secure too." Secure. That word again. I looked at him. This man who had tossed my meal in the trash and now sat in my grandmother's house asking me to hand it over. And I said the first honest thing I had said to him in years. No. His face changed. Not angry at first. Just startled, like he had heard me speak a language he didn't recognize. What do you mean, no? I mean, no. He gave a short laugh. Lena, don't get weird about this. It's just paperwork. It's my grandmother's house. It's our life. No, I said again, firmer this time. It's my inheritance. He stood up so fast the mattress bounced. You're being selfish. I did not answer. He leaned over the bed and lowered his voice. You don't want to make this difficult. Something in his tone made my skin turn cold. I asked, Is that a threat? He blinked, then scoffed. God, you always make everything dramatic. He walked out, leaving the door open behind him. I lay there with my heart pounding, staring at the doorway long after he was gone, and I knew then that this was no longer about dinner. It was about control. The next morning, I made coffee for myself and sat at the small kitchen table in Grandma's house while the sun came up over the porch swing. I should have felt lonely. Instead, I felt something close to relief. The house was quiet. The walls did not judge me. Nothing in it asked me to be smaller. By 8:30, my phone rang. It was Ellie, my grandmother's old neighbor and one of the few people in town who still answered messages from me without first checking whether I sounded useful. Lena, she said, you need to call the law office. Right now. My stomach tightened. Why? What happened? Nothing bad, she said, but her voice was too careful. Just call them. So I did. The attorney, Mr. Alvarez, was patient in the way only someone with very expensive patience can be. He told me my grandmother had added a safeguard to the trust after she became worried that someone might pressure me after her passing. He said there had already been an inquiry. An inquiry? I repeated. Yes. Your husband contacted the office last week asking about his rights to the inherited properties. I sat very still. He asked what would happen if you wanted to refinance, Mr. Alvarez continued, and whether a spouse could challenge the trust under certain circumstances. I almost dropped the phone. He had been planning this before he ever asked me about the house. The question was not whether he had been greedy. The question was how long he had been pretending. Mr. Alvarez said one more thing that made my chest tighten. Your grandmother also left a sealed letter for you. She requested it be opened if you ever came in person. I was there within the hour. The law office was small and warm, with old wood furniture and the smell of paper and coffee. Mr. Alvarez handed me a cream-colored envelope with my name written in my grandmother's careful, slanted handwriting. I opened it with shaking fingers. My dearest Lena, if you are reading this, then you have likely discovered that marriage does not always mean safety. I wish I could spare you that lesson, but life is not always gentle. I know you love with your whole heart. That is a beautiful thing. It is also the kind of thing unkind people mistake for weakness. Do not let anyone talk you out of what is yours. Do not let anybody tell you gratitude should cost you your dignity. And if a man ever tries to make you feel small in the house your hands helped preserve, remember that you were never born to be a servant in your own story. There was more. Advice about banking. A note about a separate account she had set aside for me. A mention of a local accountant she trusted. And then, at the bottom, one line that made my eyes sting. I saw the way he looked at your future before he ever knew it had value. I knew without asking that my grandmother had seen Mark clearly from the beginning. She had not liked him. She had tolerated him for my sake. That evening I did something I had never done in 6 years of marriage. I checked the finances. What I found made my hands go numb. Mark had been moving money. Not huge sums at first, just small transfers from our joint account to cover business expenses, gas, tools, parts, repairs, then larger withdrawals. Then a line of credit I had not known existed under my name, one he had apparently helped me apply for because he handled paperwork better. I sat there at the table with the laptop open and felt like the floor was sliding under me. There were charges for hotel rooms in a city 2 hours away, charges for a jewelry store, charges for a steakhouse I had never been to, and one monthly payment to a private mailbox service. I clicked on that one. The mailbox address led to a business filing under Mark's name and another name I did not recognize. A woman's name. My mouth went dry. I dug deeper and found emails. Not in his main account, of course, because he was not stupid. But old text backups synced to a tablet he had left at the house and forgot I knew the passcode to because he used our anniversary date, which was not as romantic as he thought. The woman was called Chelsea. She worked at the hardware supplier where Mark ordered materials for his jobs. The messages were not love notes in the melodramatic sense. They were worse than that because they were practical. You should tell her soon. Is the house definitely in her name? Once you get the property sorted, we can talk about the condo. Don't worry. She won't fight it. I sat there staring at the screen until I couldn't see clearly anymore. He wasn't just trying to take my inheritance. He was building another life using my money while keeping me busy in the kitchen. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. I took screenshots. Then I backed everything up to a flash drive and emailed copies to myself, to Mr. Alvarez, and to the accountant my grandmother had named in her letter. The next day, I met the accountant, a practical woman named Denise, who wore reading glasses on a chain and had no patience for nonsense. She reviewed the records in silence for nearly an hour. Then she looked up and said, "Your husband has been using funds connected to the rental property for personal expenses. If there were any forged signatures involved in the account changes, that becomes serious very quickly. Can I prove it?" I asked. Denise tapped the page. "If your signatures don't match and the phone logs line up, yes." My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears. Should I confront him? Denise gave me a look so steady it felt like an anchor. "Not yet. First, protect yourself." So I did. I changed passwords, opened a new account, moved what legally belonged to me, and let Mark continue believing I was sulking over a ruined dinner. For 3 days I played the same part I had always played. Quiet wife, mild disappointment, easy to manage. He relaxed around me. That was the mistake he made. Men like Mark do not fear the woman who is angry. They fear the woman who becomes calm. On Friday, he came home looking pleased with himself. He tossed his keys on the counter and said, "My mom wants us over Sunday. She's making pot roast. We should talk then about the house." "Sure," I said. He blinked. "That easy?" "I'm tired of fighting," I said. He smiled, like he had won. The look on his face almost made me pity him. Almost. Sunday came gray and wet. We drove to Diane's split-level house on the edge of town, where every room looked like it had been arranged to impress people she didn't even like. Tessa was already there. So was Diane's brother, who owned a used car lot and talked too much. Mark was in unusually good spirits, and I knew why. He thought this was the day I would finally give in. Diane served dinner in her best dishes and smiled at me as if she were offering charity. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "I've had a lot on my mind," I replied. Mark reached for my hand under the table and gave it a squeeze. "We're about to sort it all out." Diane nodded approvingly. "That's what marriage is. Compromise." I set my fork down and looked at each of them in turn. Then I said, "Before we discuss the house, I think we should discuss Mark's other expenses." The room went still. Mark laughed, but it was forced. "What are you talking about?" I took out my phone and placed it on the table, screen up. The first photo was a screenshot of the private mailbox filing. The second was a hotel receipt. The third was the messages with Chelsea. Diane's face drained of color so quickly it was almost impressive. Tessa frowned. "What is this?" Mark stood up too fast. "You went through my things?" I looked at him. "You mean the tablet you left open because you thought I was too stupid to know the code?" He stared at me. I continued. "You took money from the rental income. You opened a line of credit under my name. You've been asking the law office about my inheritance for over a week. And you've been telling another woman that once the house is sorted, the two of you can move on." No one spoke. Then Diane did something I will never forget. She said, very softly, "Mark?" Not because she was shocked, because she wanted to know how much of it I knew. That was when I realized Diane had suspected more than she had admitted. Tessa looked between us, confused and pale. "Tell me this is some kind of joke." Mark's jaw worked. He glanced at his mother as if he expected her to save him. Instead, she asked, "Is it true?" He snapped, "What did you expect me to do?" Sit around and wait while she holds everything over my head? Everything. That was the word. Not love, not marriage, everything. There it was. The truth, naked and ugly. He looked at me, and all the charm was gone from his face. You've been acting like this little inheritance makes you special. I felt my hands go cold, but my voice stayed steady. My grandmother built a life from nothing so I could have security. You looked at that security and saw a target. Diane stood up slowly, one hand on the chair for balance. Mark, tell me you did not bring another woman into this family. He threw his napkin on the table. Oh, please. You're all acting shocked like this wasn't bound to happen. She's impossible. She won't sign anything. She won't help. She won't even support me when I'm trying to grow. By grow, I said. You mean use my property and my money? Your money? He barked. I'm your husband, and I'm a human being, I said. The room went silent again. I could hear rain tapping the windows. Mark turned red. He looked around the table like he wanted an ally and found only faces turning away from him. Diane sat down very slowly. Her voice had changed. How long? He muttered. It doesn't matter. It matters to me, she said. He shoved his chair back. Fine, a few months. Maybe more. But that's not even the point. The point is, she never respected me. Tessa let out a disbelieving laugh. You took her money and you're worried about respect? Mark pointed at me. She set me up. She's been waiting for a chance to make me look bad. I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Because that was when I slid one more thing onto the table. A printed document from the bank. Not only had he been moving money, he had missed a payment on a business loan he had quietly taken out using the rental property as collateral. And because of the trust structure, that loan was now under review. Denise had uncovered it in the paperwork. I watched his face go blank. He whispered, How did you get that? I said, The same way you got everything else. Carelessly. Diane's hand flew to her mouth. Tessa stood up. You did what? Mark looked at his sister. Desperate now. It was temporary. Temporary? I repeated. You told Chelsea the house was basically yours. Chelsea's name landed in the room like a dropped plate. Diane shut her eyes. I think that was the moment she understood that this was not just a bad phase or a foolish mistake. Her son had not merely acted badly. He had built his life on lies and expected everyone around him to call it ambition. Mark's face hardened again, a reflex I had seen too many times. You're making a big show because you want revenge. Revenge? I said quietly. No. If I wanted revenge, I wouldn't have waited until now. I would have let your own paperwork bury you. The words came out before I could stop them. And I saw him flinch. Good. Because the final piece was not a bluff. I had already met with Mr. Alvarez. I had already put the trust into review. I had already filed the financial evidence. And I had already asked Denise to prepare the documents that would freeze access to the rental income until the court sorted out the misuse. Mark's face changed a second time, from anger to fear. You can't do that, I said. I already did. The sound Diane made then was not a sob. It was smaller than that. It sounded like the air leaving a room. Mark stared at me as if I had become a stranger. You ruined everything. I laughed once, and even I could hear how tired it sounded. No, Mark, you did that. I just stopped protecting you from it. He stepped toward me, and for one brief second I thought he might say something reckless or try to snatch my phone. But he didn't. He stopped, because he saw something in my face he had not seen before. I was done. Not angry. Not begging. Done. And that frightened him far more than shouting ever could have. Diane spoke first, her voice thin and shaking. Get out. Mark turned to her, stunned. Mom, get out of my house, she repeated, louder this time. Now, he looked at Tessa, but she would not meet his eyes. He looked at me, and I saw the last trace of arrogance crack across his face like ice. You're all going to regret this, he said. I answered, No, only you will. He left so fast the front door banged hard enough to rattle the walls. Nobody moved for a long minute. Then Diane sat down heavily and put both hands over her face. I had expected anger from her, maybe denial, What I did not expect was the broken sound of a mother realizing her son had become the kind of man she used to warn people about. Tessa cried quietly into a napkin. I stayed because, strangely, I felt less lonely in that room than I had in my own marriage for years. We were all looking at the wreckage, and for once, nobody was pretending it was pretty. The weeks after that were not graceful. They were long and full of calls, signatures, records, meetings, and forms that never seemed to end. Mark called me 17 times the first day. Then he started with texts. First angry, then apologetic, then wounded, then pitiful. You're overreacting. We can fix this privately. Think about what this will do to my reputation. Please answer me. You're embarrassing me in front of my family. I didn't answer any of them. The law office handled the rest. Denise confirmed the financial misuse. Mr. Alvarez moved quickly on the trust protection. The business loan tied to the rental property was investigated. The paper trail was stronger than Mark thought, because people like him always believe their own mess can be hidden behind charm and urgency. They think if they move fast enough, the truth will get tired and sit down. It did not. It caught him. Chelsea, it turned out, was not as loyal as he believed. Once she realized he had lied about the house, the money, and the status of his marriage, she backed away quickly. Apparently, she had been told I was basically gone from the picture. Funny how often men like Mark depend on women not talking to each other. His business partners cut ties when the loan review became public. A few accounts were frozen. One of his biggest clients canceled after hearing he had used personal funds for business deposits in a way that looked questionable. The man who had once strutted through our kitchen like he owned the world suddenly found the world had paperwork. And paperwork, unlike Mark, kept receipts. As for Diane, she did something unexpected. She called me. I nearly didn't answer, but curiosity won. She sounded older than I had ever heard her sound. "Lena," she said, "I owe you an apology." I said nothing. She continued. "I knew he was difficult. I knew he expected too much. I told myself that was just how men can be when they're under pressure. I was wrong." The honesty in her voice was rough, almost painful. "I'm sorry," she repeated. "I watched you carry too much and said too little." I stood by my kitchen window with the phone in my hand and watched rain roll down the glass. "I appreciated you more than you probably know," I said, and I meant it in a way I had never let myself say before. Diane had not been cruel every day. Sometimes she had been kind in the weak, ineffective way some people are when they choose comfort over courage. It still mattered that she was finally telling the truth. After a pause, she asked, "Is there anything I can do?" I almost said no. Then I remembered something my grandmother once told me. Peace is not the same as punishment. So I said, "Tell the truth if anyone asks." She agreed. That was enough. Mark tried one last time to corner me in person. He came to the house on a Saturday afternoon when I knew he thought I would be alone. He was thinner, more tired, and no longer smelled like confidence. He stood at the porch like someone who had forgotten the rules for entering a life he had once treated like a hallway. I kept the screen door closed. "What do you want?" I asked. He swallowed. "To talk. We've talked." He looked past me into the house. "You really did this to me." I almost laughed. "You did this to yourself." His expression twisted. "You could still help me." There it was again. Help. That word had been the leash around my neck for years. I crossed my arms. "Help you with what?" "Withdraw the complaint. Tell them it was a misunderstanding." I stared at him. He had come all the way to my grandmother's porch to ask me to erase his consequences. "No." His shoulders sank. "Lena, do not use my name like that," I said. "Not with that tone. You gave up the right." He looked angry now, which was almost easier to face than desperation. "You think you're so righteous because you got one house from your dead grandmother." My chest went tight, but I didn't let it show. "I think," I said, "that she loved me enough to protect me from men exactly like you." That hit him hard enough that he actually stepped back. For a second, I saw the person he might have been if he had ever learned how to be decent. Then it vanished, and left the usual bitterness behind. He sneered, "You'll end up alone." I smiled, and for the first time in years, it felt real. "Maybe, but I won't be trapped." I closed the screen door and walked away before he could say anything else. 2 months later, the divorce was in motion. It was not dramatic in the way people imagine. There were no screaming courtroom scenes, no perfectly timed confessions, no movie-style breakdowns. Real justice is slower and more boring than that. It is signatures, evidence, hearings, and someone finally, officially, saying the words that make the lies stop working. The trust remained mine. The property stayed protected. The funds he had taken were traced and partially recovered. His business suffered enough that he had to sell his truck. That detail gave me an unreasonable amount of satisfaction, I'll admit. He had always loved that truck like it was an extension of his ego. As for me, I did something I had not done since before I got married. I started living in my own house like it was mine. I painted the kitchen a warm cream color. I planted lavender by the porch. I replaced the old curtains with ones that let in sunlight. I invited Ellie over for coffee and real conversation. I cooked when I wanted to cook, not because somebody expected me to prove my worth through a meal. And one evening, about 6 months after the dinner in the trash can, I made the same chicken with lemon and herbs, not because I had to, because I wanted to remember the woman who had stood in that kitchen and finally understood she deserved better. I set the table for one, then two, because Ellie was coming by. When the food was ready, I looked at the full plates and felt something settle in me that I had not felt in years. Peace. Not victory exactly, not even revenge, though part of me would be lying if I said I didn't enjoy the fact that he had to face the mess he made. It was something quieter. It was self-respect, which is harder to win and easier to keep once you have it. On the anniversary of that terrible dinner, I got a message from Diane. Not a long one. Just a photo of Tessa with her new baby and a note that said, "We are all trying to do better." I smiled when I read it. People like to think karma arrives with thunder. Sometimes it does. But often it arrives as a man losing the hand that fed him because he mistook kindness for weakness. Sometimes it arrives as a mother finally seeing her son clearly. Sometimes it arrives as a woman opening a legal envelope from her grandmother and discovering that love can be smart enough to leave instructions. For me, karma arrived the night my husband dumped my dinner in the trash. That was the moment my old life ended. And the moment my real life began. I never cooked for Mark again. But I did cook. For myself, for friends, for the neighbors who brought tomatoes from their gardens and stories from their lives. For my own table, under my own roof, in a house that had once been a symbol of everything I could lose and became, instead, the place where I found myself again. And every time I lifted a spoon or set a plate or pulled a pie from the oven, I remembered this. A woman who has been made to feel small will eventually either disappear or rise. I chose to rise.